I'm a mile under bow. It was awful up there where I was work.
Yeah, I wasn't no hurry, no way. I knew flood tide's been going where the wind's at. My wind gauge's been going 15 to 20 or better all morning.
Yeah, it was definitely that up there. I'm sure that flood tide, but that flood tide was still strong up there, I'm sure.
The watermen from Tangier leave the dock well before sunrise to make it out to the oyster grounds. By law, you must wait until the sun rises above the horizon to start harvesting oysters. The Chesapeake, especially the Tangier Sound, are ripe with oysters, and watermen from the eastern shores of Virginia come in droves to harvest them.
This oystering season has been the best year by far. Last year was very close to this year, where there's just a huge abundance of oysters, and it just seems like everywhere you go, there's a crazy amount of oysters around.
Alan Parks has been working on the water in some form since he was 15 years old.
If I could do this the rest of my life like I'm doing today, I'd oyster the rest of my life. It's just too easy.
When we get to the oyster grounds, we call it the rock. We drop the dredge in the water, make a complete circle, maybe two if you need to. He winds it in. We both dump the dredge, empty it, throw it back, get going again, and we're culling, picking through the oysters, shoving the shells, dead ones, little ones back on the rock, and we keep the big stuff, take it in with us, and get a paycheck. Yeah, when we fill this up, it'll equal about half a bushel. 2 crates make a full one.
Each boat with 2 licensed watermen can harvest 16 bushels of oysters per day.
The oysters are monsters, they're huge. There's so much strike, so many, there's baby oysters, there's everything from this big to that big. You can see the spat all over them. Yeah, they're flourishing. That's the word for it, flourishing.
The Tangier Sound is an ideal environment for watermen to harvest oysters and crabs, as it combines freshwater rivers filtering into the Chesapeake Bay, mixing with the saltwater from the Atlantic Ocean, which creates the perfect salinity for oyster growth. The strong currents supply an abundance of algae, critical for the development of the underwater ecosystem. Watermen have worked these oyster beds since the 1900s. Skipjacks, pungy schooners, bug-eyes, and powered dead rises have made their living from the Chesapeake, the largest estuary in the country.
Tangier is a place that emerged as a waterman's community, in large part because of its close proximity to some of the richest oyster beds on the Chesapeake Bay. And so the water trades, first oystering and then crabbing, absolutely dominate the economy of Tangier, then and now.
There's the only options for work on Tangier are commercial fishing. We got a couple electric company guys, a couple town jobs, but other than that, it's commercial fishing.
I've been, following my dad around as a young child on the boat. Been doing this since a small child, like I have an 8-year-old. He's been on my boat off and on since he was in kindergarten. The first time he went out crab potting with me, it was 2 days before he went to school in kindergarten. We started that young. I've followed in Dad's footsteps. Dad was a waterman from a child. His dad was a waterman. His dad was a waterman. My last name is Parks, and they moved to Tangier. The first Parks family moved to Tangier during the mid-1700s. And so you can trace my family on back to that, and we've all been watermen. Lord knows how many generations that is. But we are getting fewer in number. Most people now are doing other things.
After the fleet of dead rises reach their limit, they return home to sell the day's catch. Years ago, the market came to them in the form of buyboats. These boats had a small pilot house in the stern and a long, wide-open deck for loading all sorts of cargo. The buyboats would meet the watermen out on the oyster beds and serve as a mobile market, purchasing seafood directly from the oyster tongers and dredgers, delivering and reselling them to seafood markets and shucking houses. Thousands of buyboats populated the Chesapeake Bay in the 1900s, transporting millions of oysters to market. These waters were in fact where Coastal Queen had its humble beginnings under her original name, A.G. Price. Long before carrying passengers, she delivered goods up and down the Chesapeake Bay.
Buyboats had as many uses as you could think of. I mean, she would go to Norfolk sometime just to get barrels of oil, and they would haul coal. I mean, you name a product that somebody wanted. You know, there are pictures in Larry's book of a car on one. And then they brought an elephant to Tangier Island on one for the circus. If you needed to move something from point A to point B, the buyboat was your man.
While most of the boats return to the eastern shore of Virginia, about a dozen or so make the journey back to Tangier Island to sell their oysters to the last working buyboat on the Chesapeake Bay, the Delvin K.
You know, the oyster fishery, in particular oyster dredging on the bay, has kind of an interesting background because the dredge didn't start here. The oyster dredge was used first up in New England, and when the oyster bars around New York City were depleted, some of those oystermen came down to the bay where we had these rich oyster beds and used the same device here. Of course, the watermen, not using this device, see this much more efficient means of oyster. They're mostly using hand tongs. The Virginia watermen are justly alarmed by this, and they get the Virginia legislature to outlaw the oyster dredge.
Smith Island folks harvesting with hand tongs. And here comes this big schooner up the bay dragging this big contraption. And one of the Smith Islanders said that he's caught more in one haul than we'll catch the whole winter with the stick tongs.
Ultimately, when oyster dredging is legalized again, each of the states say you must be licensed to use this equipment, and to get a license, you must be a citizen of the state. And so we brought a lot of New Englanders and New Yorkers to the Chesapeake to take advantage of oyster dredging once it could be done here. Brought new entrepreneurs into the states.
Damn Yankees.
Alan Park's uncle, Jerry Pruitt, a renowned boat builder on Tangier, has been delivering oysters for years on the Delvin K.
My uncle's gonna take these to Reedville, and they will be shoveled out and put them on a conveyor belt and dumped in a tractor trailer.
The Delvin K will travel 15 miles west to Reedville, Virginia, to offload the day's harvest to the buyer. In the off-season, Jerry dredges seed oyster on the James River, much like Jamie Green's buyboat, MOBJACK.
The buyboat MOBJACK, which they call them all buyboats, the MOBJACK is still working, dredging seed oysters. but it doesn't bite a wild caught oyster. So that makes the Delvin K a little more special. She's the last buyboat buying oysters on the Chesapeake Bay now.
Well, if you're a buyboat owner today, you're extremely dedicated to the boat. It almost becomes like family to them. You have to have a financial well-being in regards to it, but you also have to have a will to keep it. And one thing that's happened with the revival of the oyster fishery in Virginia and in Maryland is a revival of wooden boats. There's a means now with the oyster fishery to generate enough dollars to keep these boats afloat for a while. And it's given us another 20, 30, maybe 40 years of being blessed by having these boats on the Chesapeake Bay.